Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We've got another session, another deep dive with one of our dentsu experts, looking at content from the Adobe Summit 2020. With me today is Kelly Ledger. Kelly, how you doing?
Doing well, hanging in there.
Excellent. Thank you. Coming to us from the home office in New Jersey.
Slash guest room, slash Peloton studio, slash hideout from my 2-year-old. Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Good. Well, really appreciate you being here. You are part of the Merkury team, which is part of the identity solution at dentsu. So I think you're a great person to talk with us today about data and insights and identity as it relates to Adobe. So thanks for being here.
No problem.
Cool. So, as we've talked with everybody, this is the first time there's been a virtual Adobe Summit rather than a physical one. There's a lot of content to go through, but hopefully you were able to get through it pretty efficiently instead of walking the halls of Las Vegas resorts.
Yeah, I thought it was easier to sort of jump from breakout to breakout. It was nice.
Yeah, good. So in the data space and identity space, it's a pretty hot topic, sits at the center of so many things. And certainly for Adobe, their push into this space has been going on for a number of years. With products like Adobe Audience Manager and now Adobe Experience Platform really coming into its own. So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's talk about where we are today in the MarTech, AdTech kind of ecosystem as it relates to identity. Where have we been working the last couple of years, and kind of, it seems to me we're at a bit of an inflection point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last couple of years, I think there's been two ways in which you as a advertiser or marketer could bring your data into those environments or populate the MarTechs. It would primarily be via your CRM, so email list, and or tagging your assets to populate what we would probably call your DMP instance, or some other capability where you would need some PII based level data, email, potentially ad targeting. But in theory, you would either populate directly into your DMP, which most DMPs up until probably a year, maybe year and a half ago, maybe two at most, would ask you to onboard a majority of your data through the predominant graphs on the market, who then would pipe it in via sync or pixel call back to the MarTech, versus just bringing your own data, which is really probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, you could start bringing your own lists. And I think the inflection point now is Adobe especially is starting to realize there's some real power in that identity and real power in that, and that capability of marrying the email list that a client would bring you, as well as the list that they would bring to a graph provider that would essentially then push it into an endpoint for addressable targeting or advertising or whatnot. Bringing that together under sort of one roof within their ecosystem, due to all the changes that we're about to see via Google's deprecation of the third-party cookie, all the things that have led up via ITP over the last couple of years, where you've seen the browser just sort of slash audience capability and understanding of that data. So I think what really stood out to me was Adobe's sort of, we're going to bring that all in-house and understand identity sort of collectively, holistically, across the sessions in this. That's something that really stood out to me in the Adobe Summit this year.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, because this gets in the weeds pretty quickly because it is very technical. For a while now, companies like Apple have already said we're not going to have third-party cookies in our ecosystem. And now you've got Google announcing that in its ecosystem, in the world of Chrome browser, there's not going to be third-party cookies in the next year or so. And so you see the big players starting to say cookies are not going to be the way we identify people. We're going to use other methods to identify people. And in fact, this is a good thing for the industry, because the more uh, the more sort of accuracy with which we can identify a person, the better it is for everyone involved. So you see Adobe leaning into that, and you see AEP being their big stake in the ground to try to create that idea of a persistent ID.
Yeah, I mean, the couple of things that really stood out to me with a session around the AEP and identity was their sort of comprehensive view on their cooperative and private graphs and the way in which they stitch data together, whether it be from the co-op side or whether it be from the private side. I thought both were really interesting. And I think um, rather than them outsourcing that capability, it seems like they're really going to harness all of their connectivity and lean into identity a bit more. So I find that really interesting. I also find it interesting that they're sort of like openly and sort of like forward thinking and talking to the market about this. It's a big topic that we are hearing from our clients, like what's next? How do I measure? How do I have attribution if Google's third-party cookie is being deprecated? So you're just going to have silos all over the place.
Right.
I think,
It
yeah,
seems there's this question of whose ID is going to like reign supreme, and it seems like there's brewing potential battles going on there around IDs. Do you see Adobe? You said leaning into the community. I know there's so many different initiatives going on, and that you see them involved in those.
yeah, definitely. At one of the breakouts, the Cookieless World breakout, they mentioned that they're monitoring 54 organizations, proposals, and regulatory bodies that are actively involved in shaping that that future of ID, which I found really interesting. One, that there's 54, no clue that there were that many organizations. That was sort of a shocker. And number two, it seems like Adobe is really leaning in to have a seat at the table, which one could infer that they're trying to become an identity of record, right, for the industry based on sort of the AEP talk track around graphs and around identity, um, and sort of the overall platform. And then based on that, sort of we're leaning into the 54, we're watching the 54 organizations and proposals. It really seems like Adobe's trying to push into this space and create, whether it's a common ID or a common currency, around their ID, which it's just something really interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah. So, not to be really simplistic about this, but Adobe's in the business of providing software to power all sorts of different experiences. They haven't historically been in the business of being a data provider. So between brands themselves and the data that they have in a first party world and other outside organizations that do, companies that do have data that want to bring that data to a brand, is Adobe still, I mean, it seems to me AEP is still designed to be a facilitator of stitching those things together.
Yeah, it seems like it is. It's just definitely designed to be a facilitator to stitch first party, second party, third party data together, sort of in I think, a broader ecosystem. Whereas in the past, if you brought a first party file, you would have to push it to an endpoint to sort of assimilate or match that data to a third party overlay, if you will. And it seems like Adobe's saying, hey, you don't need to go outside our walls. You can do everything inside our walls. So I think that line of like service provider versus data provider is getting really blurry here, which I don't think is a bad thing. To your point earlier around accuracy, I think it lends to more accurate data being attached to an actual person. So the data actually matches who that person is, which is really the whole point of addressable advertising.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the promise here is I know who I'm marketing to. I know who I'm delivering the next moment or next experience to. Was there anything that you saw in the summit around the power of that or the impact of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had to watch the AEP identity story like actually 4 times because I found it really interesting to see how they had been sort of future proofing or creating a defensible model with a technology build that they had been sort of progressing over the last couple of years. It's almost like I mean, the Google deprecation hasn't been this sort of mystery. We all knew it was coming, but it seems like they really, instead of waiting to see how the market shook out for a year, they like jumped on it and started building like, far forward in the future so that when that day came, like well in advance, they would be prepared. That's what I got from AEP, and from the sessions that I saw. I also think it's interesting to see, what used to be, like you said, a services provider, a software provider, like really starting to take a stake in identity, to um, put some, like, I guess, like, come to the table with an idea around, this is what we believe identity to be, and this is how we view identity. And so that was interesting to me as well, because I think normally in the past, like, they just haven't been as vocal about that. So that was a big call out that I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
um, for sure.
Anything you're uh, nervous about, or are looking at it and going, we don't know where this is headed, and we don't know, there aren't some answers? Are there areas where you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hard part is, I think Adobe's AEP solutions is amazing, and I think that, everything I've seen, it sounds like it could be, really the gold standard, or a really interesting platform to watch as marketers adopt it and use it and deploy it. I'm more curious about how, if we live in this bifurcated, now identity world where there are no third-party cookies, how that identity actually gets shared and matched and understood, across a common currency. Because what I've seen in the past with walled gardens, with other graphs, with just companies in this market, usually if you create your own ID, you want your ID to be the ID. And so unless people are trading on your ID, there's no way to do true measurement and attribution, because the bifurcation and the siloing starts happening between all those IDs. So while I think it's really interesting that Adobe's leaning into these 54 proposals, it's just going to be, I think we're all going to have to watch and see how the market shakes out, and how we actually connect these sort of different IDs now that we're moving into that space, and how we actually translate that back to how a marketer could understand it, right? Like, the more that we start to create these walled gardens, the more we start to create these silos. At the end of the day, if our clients, advertisers, marketers can't understand what is actually being changed and how their marketing campaigns are or are not working, we're just doing ourselves a disservice. I'm sort of saying that industry wide, but I really think that's going to be something to watch, just in the space in general. I'm, just curious to see how Adobe will handle that.
Yeah, good. Well, look, we're just about out of time, so I appreciate you giving us your point of view, and I'm glad you were able to sort through all the content and find the bits that are interesting. I know we did a write-up as well, so we'll make sure people get access to that. And otherwise, enjoy the Peloton studio that you've got there.
Right. My 2-year-old screaming next to me.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
No problem. You too.